Good afternoon. Welcome to the third session of Dialogue 1. In this session, we will be introduced to game theory. Our speaker for this session is Mrs. Orpomitra Das, an economist by profession and a passionate environmentalist. As a student of Lady Brabourne College, Mrs. Das designed a campaign on behalf of Greenpeace India to encourage students to pledge against pollution. She has actively participated in awareness campaigns related to ecological farming. She has also helped in spreading awareness through a campaign, Sign the Petition, addressed to Mr. Amitabh Kant of Niti Aayog. The green choices demanded were a safe and nutritious food system, increased investment in soil health, rejuvenation, and traditional water conservation methods, phasing out of fossil fuels and a transition to clean renewable energy. Over to you, Mrs. Das.
Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, MHS, for having me here today. Firstly, good afternoon and welcome back to all the participants. I hope you've been able to have a quick lunch because our discussion right now is going to be all about food. So every day, without even consciously realizing it, we make hundreds of choices. And I'll give you an example right now. So let's say you're thirsty and you need to satisfy your thirst. So what do? You make a choice between drinking water or maybe drinking juice. Let's say you choose water. Next decision that you need to take, or the next choice that you need to take, is whether you're going to drink room temperature water or whether you're going to drink cold water. Should you drink it straight off the bottle, or would you rather pour it into a glass and then drink? So every step of the way we're making a choice, and these choices are not random. We always measure the pros and cons of every decision that we take. And so, although we may not know the technical terminology behind it, these choices are made using game theory. So today I will introduce this to you, and together we shall see how game theory is used while making food choices. I am going to take your permission and share screen. Please confirm if you are able to see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Right. Just 1 second. Now, before we proceed, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about game theory. So this was introduced by mathematician John Nash, and this is the character that was played by Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. So how many of you here have watched the movie A Beautiful Mind? Could I have a raise of hand maybe? I don't see too many hands raised. In that case, I encourage you to go home and watch the movie. It's a beautiful movie. So it gives you an insight into the personality of John Nash. Okay, now game theory has two main branches, competitive and cooperative or non-competitive. So today I will be talking about competitive game because that is what the discussion is going to be all about. So what is a game? It's an interaction between two or more players, and it's a situation where every decision that one player takes affects the other. Now, I gave y'all an example right at the beginning about drinking some water, right? So over there, it was just you. It was you who was making all the decisions. So who might be the other player or the other person here? Could anybody guess? You could turn on your video and maybe unmute and speak. All right. How many of you watched Jerry as a child? Raise of hands. Nobody. I'm not willing to accept that. You could just raise your hand option. Over there in that cartoon, you would often find two characters on the top of the heads, one being the devil and the other being the angel. So when you are the sole person taking decisions, then also there are two sides of you who are constantly arguing for and against a particular decision that you're planning to take. Let's say one side of you wants to drink cold water, but the other side of you is warning you to not drink cold water because the weather outside is bad and you may catch a cold, right? So a game is an interaction between two persons or more, and this is how game theory works. It's used extensively by biologists, military tacticians, and politicians almost everywhere. Okay. Now I will tell you all a little story. So once upon a time, there were two criminals, Fred and Wanda, and they were arrested fleeing the scene of a crime. All right, what had they done? They had stolen diamonds. Now, based on evidence that the police had, they would have to serve 2 years in prison. And they were offered a deal. If you confess and cooperate with the police, then you get immunity. That is, you don't have to serve any time in jail. All right. And if your partner confesses and you don't confess, then you have to serve 10 years in prison. And if both of you confess, then you get 5 years in prison each. Now, given these choices, which one would you think is the best deal? 2 years or 10 years or 5 years? I hope you're taking notes. It could get a little confusing. 2 years sound pretty good, right? But then there is no guarantee. What is there no guarantee regarding? Your partner. So these are two hardened criminals and they have been segregated. They've been put into separate cells and they are being questioned. So they don't know what their partner is going to choose, whether they choose to confess to the crime or not confess to the crime. They really don't know. That way, both of them are thinking whether I should confess or whether I should not confess. Now, a competitive game theory arranges all these choices and the potential consequences into a grid that we call the payoff matrix. Okay. And this is what your payoff matrix will more or less look like. I'll take a few minutes here to explain to you how this payoff matrix works. Okay. Wanda is depicted in purple and Fred is depicted in orange. All right, it's color coded. Each of them have two choices, to either confess or to not confess. Agreed? Now, going by the choices that the police have put before them, if they both choose to not confess, then given the little bit of evidence that the police have against them, they have to serve 2 years in jail. So 2 years prison time, right? Now coming to the second option, where Wanda doesn't confess, but Fred confesses. So it's the top right-hand grid, right? If Fred confesses, then he is cooperating with the police and he gets an immunity, he gets to walk free, so he doesn't have to serve any jail time. Wanda, on the other hand, is not confessing and therefore will have to serve 10 years in prison, right? Same way, if we look at the bottom left-hand grid, this grid represents Wanda confessing and Fred not confessing. The tables are simply turned where Fred has to serve 10 years in prison, and Wanda goes scot-free because she's cooperated with the police. Now, not confessing is the best option for both of them because it's the minimum jail time that they might have to serve, right? And they have no reason to trust each other either. So Wanda doesn't know whether Fred is going to stab her in the back, and Fred also doesn't know whether Wanda is going to stab him in the back. So for both of them, confessing seems to be a safer bet than not confessing, although not confessing seems to be a better choice, right? Theoretically. So what both of them end up doing is confessing, because even though not confessing seems better on paper, in reality, because they haven't had the chance to collude and decide beforehand, they can't trust each other, and there is no guarantee. So they both choose to confess and agree to 5 years in jail. All right. So this 5 years in jail for both Wanda and Fred turns out to be the Nash equilibrium. Okay, this is called the solution to this game, if I could put it that way. Okay. Now, so far, what I have said, does that make sense to everybody? Anyone who does not agree with what we've just seen in the payoff matrix? Okay. If there are any questions, please feel free to, raise your hand, and Nishita will probably, give you a cue. You could ask your question. Stop me in the middle. It does not matter. I would rather prefer that. Okay. Okay. So if I move on, you've understood how game theory works. You've understood how this payoff matrix is designed. So the first argument that we have about the food choices is something that's trending a lot in today's world. It's going vegan versus non-vegan. So there's a big, huge debate about being vegan, not vegan. Is it good for the environment? Is it good for your health? And all of that, right? So one of the key arguments in favor of veganism is that it is a greener diet, all puns intended. And a report by the UN IPCC, the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they brought out a report in 2014, according to which about 25% of the global climate change problems that we are witnessing is due to the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, forestry, and land uses. If you've been paying attention to the previous 2 sessions that we've had, we did explore a bit of this. So this is almost twice as much global warming due to pollution from vehicles. And by vehicles, we are looking at all vehicles. And another research by the University of California in Davis has shown that a single serving of beef steak emits up to 330 grams of carbon, which is equivalent to driving a car for 3 miles. I mean, who would have thought that a single serving of your steak could equate to, driving your car for 3 miles? If you choose chicken instead of beef, then there's a 5-fold drop in the emissions. And if you replace beef entirely by, say, a serving of lentils, then the carbon emitted drops down from 330 grams to just about 2 grams. Imagine. So why does this happen? This is mainly because the livestock accounts for about 14% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And you could be thinking 14% is pretty small, it's not a big number, but 14% is also the amount that transportation contributes towards greenhouse gases, and transportation including cars and trucks and ships and planes, everything on a global level. So that is pretty huge, I think, right? So the good news here for those of us who are non-vegetarians is that if you want to do something for the environment, which has been, I think, a crux of all our discussions from the morning, what is it that you can do? So it's not that you have to go vegan. It's not that you have to give up on your favorite meat. All you have to do is just reduce the portion size. So rather than ordering a 6-ounce steak, if you just bring down your portion size to 3.5 or 4 ounces, then you help to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by about 50%. And the good news, another good news, is that on a global front, about about 19% meat consumption has reduced globally, and 39% of Americans in 2017 have tried to incorporate a more plant-based approach to their food choices, which is why McDonald's, if some of you may be aware of this, McDonald's included a Beyond Meat burger for the first time ever just last year, I think in the month of September. So that is also represented in these graphs. So people across the world, if you see, most of the people who consume meat happens to be from USA, and India is very little in that context. USA followed by Canada and the whole of Europe. Good thing is the greenhouse gas emissions are, yes, the least in a vegan diet, in a vegetarian diet, and in the Mediterranean diet. Why is that? Because these sorts of diet focus mostly on plant-based sources, on fish rather than meat, and on livestock, which is what helps lower the emissions. Okay. Also, vegan diets are about 40% cheaper than your regular non-veg diets. This was a report by Kantar, and a meal which contains meat or fish costs about 1.77 pounds per person, whereas a veg meal costs only 1.04 pounds per person. Now, how many of you here think that going vegan is then the way forward, that that is the best thing that we can do for our environment, and all of us should try and move towards a more vegan diet? Okay, I did see a hand raised, I think. So, and some of you may not be very happy about it. I don't want to go vegan. I enjoy my food. So this same thing, I've used cost and greenhouse emissions to see the payoff matrix of our choice between vegan and non-vegan food. So for vegan food, the first top left grid shows a lower cost as well as lower greenhouse emissions. Just diagonally for non-vegan diet, it shows a high cost and high greenhouse emissions. The cost and vice versa for the low high and high low. So if you're looking at vegan and greenhouse emissions, then that's low. If you look at non-vegan and cost, then it's pretty high. Same way, if you look at cost and vegan, then it is low. If you look at greenhouse emissions and non-vegan, then it's pretty high. So going by this payoff matrix, you may feel that going vegan is the best way forward. But there is a big but here, because a researcher at the University of Oxford, Joseph Poor, he studies environmental impacts of food, and he feels that we should be mindful about what we consume and where it is coming from. Just the previous session spoke extensively about Food Mile, and you all have been involved in preparing a PPT where you did a little bit of research work as well. So air transported fruits and vegetables can actually create even more greenhouse gas emissions per kg than maybe livestock. So delicate fruits like kiwis and strawberries and blueberries are often imported from other parts of the world because they are not native to a lot of the regions. And because it's not a local fruit, it needs to be imported, which obviously contributes to the carbon footprint of that particular fruit or vegetable. And a research by the University of Manchester found out that asparagus, which is eaten extensively in the UK, has one of the highest carbon footprints among all the other vegetables eaten in that country, with 5.3 kgs of carbon dioxide being produced for just 1 kg of asparagus, which is being flown in from Peru. Avocados also contribute heavily towards the carbon footprint. So it's not just that you need to go vegan, that is a personal choice. But yes, we could reduce the portion of our food, and we could definitely be a little mindful of where our food comes in from. The next aspect is fresh food versus processed food. This also has been covered a little bit in the previous session. Now, among processed food, there's a classification according to Nova, and there's something called ultra processed food, okay, or UPFs. So these are industrial food and drink formulations which are made from additives and other substances. It's not very natural. And some examples could be confectionery items, chicken nuggets, sweetened beverages, all the good things that draw us, that are attractive. And the purpose of ultra processing is to create a branded, very convenient, durable, ready to consume, very, very profitable kind of a food product, which has slowly started displacing all other food groups. And this rapid growth in UPF consumption means that there is an urgent need to scrutinize the health and the environmental impacts of these items. Many of these UPFs contain palm oil and soy oil. We in this first session, you did look at the effects of palm oil, why we need to be a little concerned about it. And UPFs also use extensive packaging, which is a major source of environmental waste pollution. And the packaging is mostly not very environment friendly. It may lead to carcinogenic and endocrine disruptions because of certain properties like the bisphenol A, which these packaging contains. Okay. Are you all with me so far? Because finally, I have the Payoff Matrix. It is similar. I've kept it similar with cost and greenhouse emissions. Could someone from the student body like to explain this? Anyone?
Okay, you could start. So from what I can understand, should I try?
Yes, of course.
So from I'd like the matrix, yes, ma'am.
Rishabh, you could keep your camera on while you speak.
Okay, sure. So okay, so from the matrix, what I can understand is for fresh food, the greenhouse gas emission is less and the cost is also less. So it is the most environmentally viable solution. And however, for the processed food, the cost is high, but the greenhouse gas emission is high, but the cost is low. And then on the other side of the grid, for the processed and the fresh food, once again, the greenhouse gas emission is low, but the cost is high. And again, on the downward side, the greenhouse gas emission is also high and the cost is also high. So it is the least environmentally viable solution. So that is what I understood from the lecture.
Thank you, Rishabh. You are absolutely correct. So if you look at fresh food, then both the cost because it doesn't involve a lot of packaging. So the cost is low as well as the greenhouse gas emissions for fresh food. But if you look at processed food, then yes, there is a certain cost involved. And of course, the greenhouse gas emissions are also pretty high. Now, processed food does not only have a cost in terms of money, but also in terms of our health. So we need to be a little mindful of what all these processed foods are doing to us and to our health. Okay. Moving on, the last segment that we have is regarding locally grown and locally sourced food. This draws heavily from, local and fresh food or processed and globally sourced food. So the more your food travels, the more carbon footprints it adds. And people everywhere depend increasingly on distant food sources, which is true, but it's sad. And in the United States, for example, food typically travels between 2,500 to 4,000 kilometers. So from like the farm to your plate. Those who can afford it are also, involved in eating a lot of these exotic fruits and cheese made maybe in the French countryside, which gives you a lot of cross-cultural experiences. If any of you have shopped in Big Basket, or if you're aware of it, you will know that you will get there is an entire section of exotic fruits and vegetables where you get almost everything, and it's very expensive, yes, but you have the choice. So some of us might just buy what passion fruit, or some of us might choose to have a kiwi, but we all know kiwis don't grow here, right? So it has to be imported all the way from New Zealand, and that just adds on to the carbon footprint of that particular product. If you look at the Tropicana juice bottles, there's this bottle that I looked at. It was an apple juice, and it said that it contains concentrates from Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy, Argentina, Chile, Turkey, China, Brazil, all over the world, right? So why does this happen? Because a company, especially these big brands, will look for a cheap source of their raw material. And this helps to keep the price down to a certain extent, yes, but you are just adding to all the carbon footprint. Also, because your food is traveling a long distance, all food essentially, they are not durable products. They will expire after a point of time. So they have a very limited shelf life. And the more the long distance, the more will be the packaging required, refrigeration, fuel, all of that just adds on to the pollution and waste. So, another reason why local produce is good is because it, what should I say? There aren't a lot of pesticides that are required because you're not producing in bulk, and it helps the local community. If you look at the economics of it, then buying locally reinvests your money into the local economy. So the money is, people are better off, people could be getting more jobs in the local markets. It means more tax revenue for the local governments, more investment also in the local front. And so it may help all and everything local. And if we look at the payoff matrix for locally grown versus globally sourced, then that also looks very, very similar. Explanation is also same. Okay. Does somebody have any question? Could I answer anyone's question? You could unmute and speak.
Yes, ma'am. A participant does have a question. You may go ahead, please. Aiba, you may please go ahead. Okay, ma'am, I think that was a mistake.
Right. Is there anybody else who has any question or would like to share something, anything at all?
Anyone having any questions may please raise their hands using the Zoom raise hand feature. You will then be identified. Okay. Rishabh has a question. You may go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Everything you said was very wonderful, and it definitely was very insightful in understanding what kinds of how we can bring forth a change to promote sustainable development. But I had one question, ma'am, that if we don't buy internationally used products, like you took the example of kiwi, which is imported from New Zealand. So, ma'am, that could lead to loss of jobs there too, because many countries depend on international trade, and also it could lead to decrease in international trade, both for exports that go to India, from India to other countries as well. So, ma'am, I guess this is a bit complicated in that sense. So,
I am
how
very
can we justify that exactly?
very glad you raised this point, Rishabh, because this is actually what the payoff is all about. This is where our choice comes in. So, would you rather focus only on local and ignore the global front, because that would have repercussions on your trade balance as well, because India also is a massive exporter of food products like tea and coffee, mangoes, right? So if we don't buy from other countries because it's not sustainable, then how do we expect other countries to buy from us? Right? So this is a trade-off. This is what the payoff matrix is all about. It is a choice that we as individuals have to take. But I think given all the pros, again, like I started this discussion with that, you need to measure out the pros and cons and act accordingly. If you feel it's best for the whole economy, then go ahead and do it. If you think not so much, then maybe think twice before doing something like that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Rishabh. There are more participants with questions. So Audrija has a question. Audrija, you may go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. It was really engaging and there were many new elements that I got to learn through it. What I wanted to ask was, we saw that, a vegan lifestyle that has lower cost as well as lower emissions. But even within that, we came across certain exceptions that, that have more emissions than maybe a non-vegan diet. So in this case, how do we come to the perfect balance of where we look at the payoff matrix, but we also consider the other aspects and exceptions that come along with it?
All right, Audrija, to answer your question, firstly, the payoff matrix is not set in stone. All right, this is my payoff matrix that I have designed, and I wanted to show it with respect to cost and greenhouse emissions. Now, let's say you design a payoff matrix with maybe health and taste. So there could be a discussion, there could be a choice about would you rather go with the actual meat or would you rather go with a meat substitute? One could be healthier, but not necessarily tastier, right? So this payoff is it's open to interpretation, and it could be designed in any way that you choose to do. Secondly, again, it comes to a choice for each individual. So yes, if you just look at things from a superficial level, then yes, going vegan is very good. It is low cost, it is low greenhouse emission, seems very rosy. But you need to be a little mindful of where the food that you're replacing comes from. So if you are replacing your meat with something which is being flown in maybe 5,000 miles, then it makes no sense. You should rather go with something that's available more locally. Only then would you actually make a difference to the environment. Yes?
Thank you, ma'am. That helps.
Next question will be from Audrija Das. Audrija, you may go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, ma'am. That was a wonderful presentation. I got to know a lot about the entire game theory and how food is processed and all that. So I had a very similar question to one that was asked before. That we saw that US is one of the countries where with the majority of meat consumption. So like meat and poultry are like a major integral part of their agricultural system, and a lot of people are employed in that, and that is actually their basic livelihood. So now we are seeing a lot of people shift gradually from non-vegetarian to vegan diets. So if the numbers increase over the period of time, then how could we approach handling those people whose livelihood are based on selling meat and the various meat industries associated?
Right. So again, this is a choice that needs to be taken, right? So if I choose to shift to a vegan diet and you decide to do the same thing, and let's say all of us, all 100 odd people here decide to do that, then this is going to affect the global demand for, say, meat, correct? And this is where your question stems from, that what happens in this case? Well, supply is very closely related to demand. So as the producers see there is a shift, they also are usually pretty flexible, and they also shift their production to something which is more in demand. I'll give you a very small example, but something that you will be able to relate to. Just at the start of the pandemic, if you remember, there was a massive shortage of sanitizers, right? Because nobody knew, none of the producers knew that it was going to become such a huge demand, there's going to be such a huge demand for the sanitizers. And a little later, big brands like Chanel and Versace, they switched from the production of perfume to the production of sanitizers. So they observed the trend in the market, they looked at the change in the demand, and they shifted accordingly, and they moved to a different line of production. So this is probably what is lying in wait in the near future, maybe, if vegan diet gains more and more popularity.
Thank you.
The next question is from Malaika. You may please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Ma'am, I enjoyed your presentation a lot. I learned many new things about game theory, but I think I disagree with the notion that veganism is the way forward and it should be implemented, because non-veg food, like basically meat products, dairy products, they are not just food. They are sometimes they hold cultural significance. Like in Eid, there is a tradition of butchering lamb, and then Thanksgiving as well. Then some countries, they are inherently tied to meat products, like the French, Italians with cheese, Japan with sushi. So it would be unfair to state that like should not be that.
Of course, which is why I kept, if you remember the Payoff Matrix, I did not explore any of the what should I say, sections which could stem into an argument or a controversy. I stuck to the facts. So vegan diet is less expensive than non-vegan diet, and it does emit slightly lesser greenhouse gas effects than your non-vegan diet. But anytime that you are designing a payoff matrix, these are the things that you need to make a choice between. These are the things that you need to keep in mind. If everybody decides to go vegan, then what about our culture? What about our tradition? Those are bound to be affected 110 times. Yes, I totally agree with you. And it is up to the people. And see, this is very closely related to personal choices. So unless and until a person wants to do it himself or herself, this change will not happen. And it's not necessary that this change is the only way that we can save the world. I mean, you could just reduce your portion of serving rather than giving up on it altogether, right?
Yes,
I'm glad you disagreed.
Ma'am, but also isn't the vegan diet kind of incomplete in its nutrition? Because like we're discussing food.
There is a lot of debate about this. It really depends on what you are replacing your non-veg element of the food with. So some proteins, minerals, vitamins are, could be replaced with something else, something which is vegan. And sometimes it is not possible to do that, which is when you may need to take supplements. So you will find a lot of vegan people, they do increase their intake of supplements just to make up for the deficiencies. Yes.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
And we have one last question by Suchir Anand. And since we are running short on time, I do not think we'll be able to take any more questions. Suchir, you may go ahead.
Thank you. I won't be able to open the camera because there is some network connection. But my question was, as ma'am, you mentioned about mainly veganism related to meat eating habits, but as true vegans say that it is basically not using any of the animal based products. And in a country like ours, in where we have a lot of our diet or our culture basically going around dairy and dairy products. And also, on the other hand, we highly have inadequate or strongly, it is highly unrecommended in our country to take beef or slaughter useful cattle. So in our country, if cattle is not useful for dairy and meat consumption is culturally not quite viable option, so don't you think that in such a case, if everyone is still going overemphasizing on being vegan, it will rather strain the agriculture process or the strain on land to produce food and lead to more usage of fertilizers, etc.?
It does, and that is one of the key arguments against veganism. I am glad you brought it up. With the amount of livestock that you need to kind of help grow, you need about 1 million tons of grain to just feed the livestock. And that same amount of grain could in fact be used to feed 3.5 billion people. All right, so that is a huge number. And in a country like ours, where there are still people who are dying of hunger, there is a lot of debate, argument regarding this one thing. And culturally, traditionally, India is a very diverse country with different food habits, with different traditions, and it's very difficult to bring it down to one single choice. In a country as diverse as India, there will always be a fight, if I may use the word, between vegans and non-vegans, because there are arguments for and against both these diets. And so we still don't have one answer. It is an ongoing debate, and I think this debate is going to continue for a very long time. Thank you, everybody. It was wonderful interacting with all of you.
Thank you, Mrs. Das, for your insight. I'm sure we have a lot to take from it. And it was really nice to see so many students, they had questions to ask you. Thank you.